Good morning, everyone. My name is Angela Smith and I'm the leader of the Labour group in the House of Lords, and thanks everyone for coming along today, and sorry to keep you waiting for a few minutes. What we're talking about today, my God, to come along, is about the threat that's posed to our public services if we were to have 5 more years of the Tories, and how we as Labour will take a very different approach. And we have a plan to reverse the decline that we've seen under this Conservative government. We'll be hearing from Angela Rayner, our Shadow Education Secretary, and Jonathan Ashworth, our Shadow Health Secretary. We're also launching our latest election poster, which I'm told it's there now, you can see behind us, about what could happen to an NHS waiting list. They're just going to soar if the Tories return to government. But first, it's my pleasure to ask Jeremy Corbyn to say a few words to you about this campaign. Thank you.
Good morning, and thank you all very much for coming this morning, and thank you, Angela, for that introduction. The future of our National Health Service and our schools are at stake in this election. The state that the Conservatives have left our NHS, our children's schools in, is anything but strong and stable. Over the last 7 years, they've starved public services who rely on those resources, because at every turn the Conservatives have chosen tax giveaways for the few over public services for the many. Patients are suffering ever longer waits and overcrowded wards. Those who need care have been left without it. A&E, maternity units and whole hospitals are threatened with closure. Children are crammed into overcrowded and crumbling classrooms. Schools are sending home begging letters to the parents. It has to change. And together we have the power to make it change on the 8th of June. Labour will invest in our people, schools and hospitals. We will cut school class sizes, not cut schools. Take 1 million people off the National Health Service waiting lists, not add millions more. Ensure that people get the care that they deserve. And guarantee the dedicated staff a pay rise. Another 5 years of the Conservatives would be disastrous for our public services. If they carry on as they are now, then by 2022 there could be 5.5 million people on the NHS England waiting lists. 1.5 million older people with unmet care needs. 650,000 pupils crammed into primary classes of over 30. Families left almost £450 worse off per child as a result of the Tories' plan to scrap free school meals to 1.7 million of our children. That's the Conservative vision for Britain. But don't take my word for it. Last week, the IFS made clear the Conservative manifesto promises no new money to the National Health Service and a real terms cut in pupil funding at school. That vision does not have to become a reality. On the 8th of June, there's only one party that will improve our public services for the many, not the few. That is the Labour Party. We can do better than this. Labour will build an NHS and social care system for the many. We will invest 37 billion into our NHS and take 1 million people off the waiting list by 2022. We will invest 8 billion in social care over the next 5 years and lay the foundations for a national care service to integrate health and social care. Labour will build a national education service and invest in our children's futures. We will cap class sizes at 30 for 5, 6 and 7-year-olds. And Labour will provide free school meals to all primary school children. The Conservative Party would take that away and replace it with a thimbleful of Rice Krispies for each child. In the 5th richest country of the world, it's not acceptable to leave people languishing in A&E departments on trolleys in hospital corridors without care at all. It can never be right and never make sense to undermine the future of our next generation. We believe that those who can afford it should pay just a little bit more to fund care, dignity and opportunity for all. It now gives me great pleasure to introduce our Health Secretary, John Ashworth, to take you through the details of our concerns over the National Health Service. Thank you very much. John, over to you.
Thank you, Jeremy, and good morning. The Tories thought they could glide through this election with nothing more than trite slogans, but the British people are ensuring that is not quite going to plan. The British people want answers on how many pensioners stand to lose from Tory plans. The British people want answers on what the school funding cuts will mean for their children, and the British people want answers on why their NHS is being pushed backwards and why they are waiting longer and longer for healthcare. On the morning of their manifesto launch, the current Conservative Health Secretary promised, and I quote, to increase spending on the NHS above promises made to date. But within a matter of days, the Independent Institute for Fiscal Studies confirmed that the Tories' plans contain no new money for frontline services. This is not the first time the Conservatives have broken their promise on health spending. During the last Parliament, the Tories were slapped down by independent experts for using misleading and discredited figures on NHS spending. The head of the NHS, the Chief Executive, then accused the Prime Minister of, quote, stretching it by saying the health service got the money it asked for. The truth is, the Tory cash crisis in our NHS is getting worse. Last week, leaked figures estimated that hospitals in England ended the financial year more than 700 million in the red. The funding crisis has left the NHS weak and unstable, with patients being forced to pay the price. The British people deserve an honest picture about the state of our health service, and this is why we are publishing today a dossier setting out our new analysis on the scale of the underfunding in the NHS and the projected impact on patient care of another 5 years of Conservatives. Now, first on infrastructure. We are all familiar with the recent cybersecurity attacks on the NHS, which hit more than 40 hospitals across England. Many NHS experts warned that investment in NHS infrastructure, including IT, had been cut back over the last 7 years. Well, today, based on evidence we have collected through Freedom of Information requests, we can reveal the impact of these infrastructure cuts. Hospitals left crumbling, patient care at risk, staff being forced to work in facilities that are simply no longer fit for purpose. So we can reveal that in a hospital in South London, a wheelchair-bound client had to be seen outside on the steps of the building as a result of the disabled lift being out of order. In Coventry, a leak from the ceiling onto an operating table meant that patients had to be rerouted to other theatres. In Cornwall, power cuts in Rhesus. In Essex, water failures closed a ward and meant patients had to be moved. In the Isle of Wight, a significant leak from a decontamination waste pipe caused flooding on the Level 8 outpatient department. The endoscopy department was out of action for 2.5 days, resulting in 12 cancelled lists and fast-track patient breaches. And at the Royal Surrey County Hospital, in the Health Secretary's own backyard, of course, leaks in the roof have prevented staff doing their jobs for patients. We simply cannot go on like this. Our staff deserve better, patients deserve better, our loved ones deserve better. Secondly, on standards of care. Since the 2015 general election, the Tories have failed on every single major standard of care. Patients across England are being failed, and the blame lies firmly at the door of 10 Downing Street. The 18-week referral to treatment target was last met in February 2016. The 62-day cancer waiting time target last met December 2015. The 4-hour A&E target last met July 2015. The 18-minute ambulance response time target for urgent calls last met May 2015. The consequence of these failings is millions more people every year waiting in pain for urgent care or waiting in discomfort for routine treatments. Now, before the general election was called, You will recall the Chief Executive of the NHS admitting that because of Tory underfunding, the 18-week target for treatment would not be met for at least several years. Legal opinion we have sought from James Gowdy QC suggests this is a breach of the legal rights contained within the NHS Constitution. But the analysis we are publishing today reveals that under the Conservatives, waiting lists are set to grow even further. Another 5 years of a Tory government would bring 5 more years of underfunding, 5 more years of growing waiting lists, and 5 more years of patients being let down. On current projections, if the Tories are re-elected by 2022, 3.5 million people will wait more than 4 hours in A&E each year. 800,000 will wait more than 4 hours on hospital trolleys. 2 million hospital bed days will be lost because of delayed transfers of care. 1.5 million people will have unmet care needs, and more than 5.5 million people will be on the waiting list for NHS treatments. In other words, thousands of patients every single day being let down by the Tories, being denied the care they need and deserve, and having their health put at risk because of the damaging policies of this right-wing Tory government who don't believe in our NHS. Labour has been very clear in this election about our plans for the NHS. 27 billion of extra funding over the Parliament, 10 billion of capital funding to invest in the NHS infrastructure, patient guarantees to legal rights enshrined in the NHS Constitution, and a renewed focus on keeping people fit and well through investment in public health to reduce demands on the NHS. But at the same time, the Conservatives in this election are misleading voters about their record and are being dishonest with voters about their plans for the future. In conclusion, the choice in this election is now clear. It's a choice between investment in the NHS with Labour versus no more money for the NHS under the Tories. It's a choice between waiting lists falling by 1 million with Labour versus waiting lists rising by 1 million under the Tories. Patients and pupils first with Labour versus cuts and closures under the Tories. A vote for Labour next Thursday is a vote for our children's education, it's a vote for our NHS, it's a vote for Britain's future, a vote for the many, not the few. Thank you.
Thank you. Our schools have reached crisis point. The Tories are cutting school budgets for the first time since the mid-1990s, and there is a crisis in our teacher and recruitment retention that is getting worse every year. Schools up and down the country are struggling to keep the lights on and are constantly faced with the impossible decisions of which teacher to make redundant or which moved from the curriculum. That is the impact of the Conservatives' education policies. A crisis in our schools that is narrowing our children's horizons and opportunities. Just last month, a school constituency sent a letter home to parents telling them that due to the cuts, they were letting go of teachers, getting rid of subjects and their school library. Theresa May can't 7% over between 2016 and 2022 of the next Parliament. So what would that mean? The educate children in class sizes of over 30. And as schools struggle to plug the holes left by the Tory cuts, it is likely that they will rely more and more on unqualified teachers who are cheaper to employ. At the current rate, we could be looking at 40,000 unqualified teachers in our schools by 2022. The Tories are a threat to the excellent school standards our children deserve. There was nothing in the Tory manifesto about school buildings, despite the fact that the school estate is crumbling, with over 60% of schools buildings having been built before 1976. They also appear to have reneged on their commitment to not allow schools to be run for profit, failing to mention it at all in their manifesto. The Tories owe this country some honesty. Why would they allow this damaging practice? If they do, we will see a race to the bottom in school standards, as happens in other countries. And what is all the more shocking is that against this backdrop of failure and neglect, the Tories are choosing to concentrate on building a handful of new selective schools for a handful of better off children. They are the same old Tories. Our schools and our children's futures are not safe under the Tories, and Labour would do things differently. We will build a unified national education service to support everyone in our country through education from cradle till grave. We believe education is a right and not the privilege it has become in Tory England. We will invest in our schools and make sure they are properly resourced by reversing the short-sighted Tory cuts. A Labour government will cap class sizes at 30 for 5, 6 and 7-year-olds to make sure that children get the attention they need and teachers can effectively reinstate order to our classroom. We will deliver free school meals for all primary school children to make sure that no child is allowed to go hungry at school. And we will pay for it by removing the VAT exemption on private schools, because it's the right thing to do. We would celebrate teachers and not talk them down. Our children deserve the best this country can give them. And under a Labour government, and as me, as your Secretary of State for Education, every child across Britain will be able to reach their full potential.
Angela, thanks very much. I think you've got a rather stark picture there, both from Jeremy, Jonathan and Angela, of what the outcomes could be of another 5 years of a Tory government. We've got time for a few questions. If you could say who you are first, would be really helpful. Laura and then John.
Thanks, Angela. Mr Corbyn, immigration has been one of the public's concerns for many years. You've said it would probably come down under your government, but can you tell us how your immigration policy would work exactly? And if not, why not? And might I also ask you to put us out of our misery to say whether or not you're going to attend the BBC debate in Cambridge later this evening, or whether you'll send someone else in your place?
Right. She never looks miserable. I'll take the questions in groups of 3. We might not be able to help you out on that one just yet, Laura, but you'll be one of the first to know. Jonathan.
No, she'll be the first. It's Andy Bell, Channel 5.
Sorry.
Don't worry. You've all cited the Institute for Fiscal Studies this morning. You obviously think they're credible. They say about your tax and spend plans that you're not being honest with the British people, trying to say, don't worry, it's only the very rich and companies who will have to pay more tax. They say that's not true. You'll have to find more tax from other people. What do you say to that?
Right, is there one more? Jack.
Thank you, Jack Blanchard from the Mirror. There's a quite surprising poll in the Times this morning suggesting that we're now on course for a hung parliament. I'd just be interested to ask Jeremy, how would you respond in that situation? What would be your plan if next Friday it's a hung parliament and you need to form some sort of coalition or minority government? What exactly are you going to do?
Who wants to go first on those group of questions? Angie?
I'll answer you, Jack. I don't trust polls. I think anyone that trusts polls at the moment is, naive to say the least. I think the Labour Party are in it to win it. We can't have, we've just outlined, Jonathan, myself and Jeremy, have just outlined what a disastrous 7 years the Tories have been to Britain, and we've just said what an opportunity it will be for Britain if they elect a Labour government, because I believe our manifesto is finishing the work of the manifesto we brought out, the Labour government of 1945. Our National Education Service will transform Britain so that our kids and our young people don't feel left behind anymore, and that our older people aren't asked to pay for their care by the government snatching their houses, which, may I add, Margaret Thatcher told them to buy in the first place.
So, John, to go next, then Jeremy can speak up.
I mean, look, we obviously disagree with the IFS on their analysis of what our tax plans mean. We think we can raise the money from the tax changes that we're proposing. Of course, it's difficult for the IFS to do an analysis of the Conservative Party's tax plans, because the Conservative Party haven't published clear plans in their manifesto, although we're all used to the Conservative Party saying one thing on tax before a general election, then breaking their commitments on tax after a general election. I do recall the Conservatives said they wouldn't increase VAT and then did, and of course this Prime Minister tried to increase national insurance despite a clear pledge at the 2015 general election. But one of the interesting things about the IFS analysis is when they compare our projections for public expenditure on the NHS and schools compared to the Conservative plans for expenditure on the NHS and schools, they do recognise and agree with us that we are putting substantially more into the NHS and into schools and that the Conservatives are proposing. And I take you back to the quotation I gave you at the start of my presentation from Jeremy Hunt, where he told the British people that the Conservatives will be putting more money into the NHS. Within days, that claim has been blown apart by the independent IFS. And this election is a big choice now between investment in the National Health Service with the Labour Party or a continued financial squeeze in the NHS under the Conservatives, with the impact that standards of care for patients will deteriorate further if the Conservatives get re-elected next week.
Jeremy.
Thanks, Angela. John and Angela couldn't have put it better. Essentially, the choice is, do you continue with the damage to our public services, damage to education and health, or do you elect a Labour government that will do things in a totally different direction and different way? That's the message we're putting out today. And on the questions, Laura, your question about immigration, as of the time we leave the European Union, free movement clearly ends within the European Union as far as Britain's concerned. We've made that extremely clear. We've also made it clear that we will legislate immediately, as indeed we tried to do in opposition when Andy Burnham proposed a resolution to this effect, on EU nationals having a right to remain in Britain. And I've also written to colleagues all across Europe asking them to do exactly the same for British nationals who live in their countries. Thirdly, under managed migration, which will come after we leave the European Union, it will be based on the needs of our economy and rights of family reunion, and it will absolutely prevent unscrupulous employers importing whole-scale workforces from lower paid regimes in order to come to this country and undercut people at work in this country. So we will end that appalling race to the bottom which does so much damage to community cohesion and relations between workers, whilst the employer laughs all the way to the bank with lower wages and all that goes with that. And I'm not going to make false promises in the way that Theresa May has done in 2010 and 2015 and she's making at this time. Therefore, we will manage migration based on the needs of this country. But we've also got to be very clear that we have a skill shortage because this government has not invested enough in training and education, and that skill shortage has to be met from somewhere. And if we didn't have migrant workers, either from outside Europe or within Europe, working in our National Health Service, as I'm sure John would confirm, it would be in an even worse state than it is at the present time. Likewise, the thousands who teach in our schools and help our children. And so we will manage that situation. Where communities have had large numbers of people moving in and greater demands have been placed on local public services, will reinstate the special fund that the previous Labour government instituted to assist local authorities in those areas. As to the debate, I simply say this. There's something very odd about going down to Skye the other night. Me being brought in front of the audience, very happy to do so and answer questions to the audience. Sat in front of Jeremy Paxman, and utter pleasure it was too, to be having a chat with Jeremy Paxman for a while. There's no finer way to spend a Monday evening. And then the Prime Minister is hiding away in a room upstairs to come down and do exactly the same. How ridiculous is that? Come on, Prime Minister, come and have a chat. Come and have a debate, and I can be ever so polite. But there are a number of questions I want to put to you. Now, I'm sure she's watching this morning's press conference, because I know she's not too busy because she's not planning a debate today. But why not change your mind? Come and have a debate. Okay. Now then,
that's an intrigue.
Now the second point on Andy's question on the IFS. The IFS has stated in stark terms what the Conservative government would do if re-elected. It has also analysed our plans and made the point that we're proposing a great deal of investment, which is obviously absolutely true. They have not costed the effect of our new taxes on overseas property, for example, because they don't exist at the present time, and therefore they didn't feel able to give a prediction of the income from them. We are very confident that everything we put forward in this document about funding our manifesto is robust and will stand up and will deliver a step change for the people of this country, and 95% will pay no more in tax or national insurance, but will benefit from better health service, better schools, and investment across the whole country in all regions of England as well as in Scotland and Wales on improved infrastructure. And on the last point that Jack so kindly raised, I never comment on opinion polls, but this election campaign is going very well. Thousands of people are joining our campaign and joining the Labour Party. And do you know what? The average donation online at our party head office is £22. This is ordinary people giving their money because they want a political change in this country. And I'm looking forward to the result, which will be announced on June the 9th.
Thanks, Jeremy. And the plea to Theresa May there that it's not too late to change her mind. Having been very embarrassingly got Andy's name wrong, I'm just going to point to people from now on, so I'll just take three more. One here, back, and over there.
Two questions for Mr Corbyn. Alison from the Daily Express. Following on Laura's question about immigration, you talked about skilled migrants being needed in our public services, and there's leaked reports in newspapers today that you're considering restoring a visa system that would let unskilled workers into the country from all over the world to compete with British workers. I'd like your comment as to whether you are considering that. And following Theresa May's claim yesterday, you have no plan for Brexit and for the Brexit talks, starting just 11 days after the election, as she said. Do you have a plan? Could you envisage asking for a delay in those talks beginning? And could you envisage, under your Prime Ministership, Britain ending up staying in the EU? Thank you.
Man with the white shirt, and then the blue tie.
George Eaton, New Statesman. The polls aside, voters have a right to know the party's potential negotiating stances in advance. You've ruled out a coalition with the SNP. Do you also rule out confidence and supply arrangements or any kind of deal to keep the Tories out?
And one more, front here. And I'll come, if we have time, we'll come back and do three more afterwards.
Kevin Schofield at Politics Home. Jeremy, you've tweeted this morning that yourself and Kezia Dugdale are of the one mind on a Scottish independence referendum. You're not in favour of one. Can you confirm that if you become Prime Minister, you will order or tell Nicola Sturgeon to take that off the table for at least the next 5 years? And can I also ask, while you were working for peace in Northern Ireland, did you ever publicly call for an IRA ceasefire?
There's a main direct to you, Jeremy.
Okay,
pick up on
Alison, thanks for your question. What you've been reading is a document that was being discussed between researchers in our teams, as happens every day of the week in every party and all around Parliament. Our policy is in our manifesto. That is the policy that we'll be carrying out. On the plan for Brexit, we accept the result of the referendum. We are leaving the European Union. Our strong negotiating position is 1, tariff-free access to the European market, 2, that we will legislate to protect the rights of EU nationals living in Britain, 3, that we will protect the rights and the regulations that we've achieved through EU membership, and there will be other areas of special agencies with Europe that we want to remain part of, such as security sharing of information, such as issues of environmental pollution and control, because all those things are very important. But crucially, it has to be tariff-free trade access to the European market. Much of our manufacturing industry relies both on a market in Europe but also a supply chain in Europe, and quite a lot of European industry also relies on a supply chain from this country, and that will be the key points in negotiations that we're putting forward. Keir Starmer is an extremely experienced and very well qualified legal brain. In fact, there is no finer legal brain, even in this room, than Keir Starmer, and he will be the one to lead our negotiations. And I'm looking forward to Keir doing that, and obviously all members of the Cabinet will be part of it. George, I think you spend too much time in Westminster, if I may say so. You should get out a bit more. I really believe that, because what you would see outside is a very different story. The enthusiasm, the step change, and the whole ambition of people to win this election for Labour, to elect a Labour government with a majority, to carry out what will be an agenda that will radically improve the lives of so many people, and what's more, give young people confidence in their own future, rather than a future of debt, underfunded schools, insecurity, and low-paid jobs. And so I invite you to join us when we celebrate victory. Is that all right, George? And if you want to come and see the enthusiasm around the country, please join us. It's fun. You'll enjoy it, I promise you. You really will. And Kevin, your question on the Scottish referendum. Obviously, the Scottish Parliament has taken a view. I believe that the last thing Scotland needs now is that debate. What is needed now is a serious debate about the problems of underfunding of public services in Scotland, the way in which the SNP government has declined to use the tax-raising powers it has in order to ameliorate the effects of austerity by the Westminster government. And I think it would be extremely wrong and unwise to go into a referendum while the Brexit negotiations are going on. And so the invitation I would give to the Scottish Government and Parliament is, think again. The important thing now is to get a deal with the European Union that guarantees us a trade access to the European markets to protect our jobs and our industries in this country. Over Northern Ireland, I always wanted to be a ceasefire. I supported ceasefires. There was one ceasefire under the Major government, which unfortunately collapsed, but another one was instituted very quickly on the election of the Labour government in 1997, and I think we should pay a huge tribute to that government, in particular to Mo Mowlam, for the work she did in achieving that. And the peace process in Northern Ireland is something that people all around the world have learnt lessons from. Yes, many of us did meet people who were on both sides of the divide in Northern Ireland, but the principle of the ceasefire and the 1997 agreement, the Good Friday Agreement, was that both sides had to recognise there was a shared and different cultural history and past in Ireland, and that stood the test of time, and we still have that government system in Northern Ireland, and I think we should be pleased about that. Those of us that took up cases of what we believed to be miscarriage of justice, I think we're right to do so. Those that try to encourage people to come to the table and talk, I think we're absolutely right to do so.
Okay, thanks, Jeremy. I've only got time now for two more questions. My apologies. I'm going to go towards the back. Lady in the red, who's been waving at me a lot at the back, and lady in the grey jacket here. You can say who you are and your answer, please.
Thank you, Tamara Cohen from Sky News. Mr Corbyn, you've criticised the Conservatives on social care. We've got a lot of numbers in this document, but what does Labour think is a reasonable amount for people to pay for social care over their lifetime? Is it the £72,000 Andrew Dilnot suggested, or if not, what is it? As a quick second one, if I may, Theresa May said yesterday that if you were negotiating Brexit, she said you would be alone and naked in the negotiating chamber. What would you say to her?
Not a pretty sight. Right, the next sponsor over here. I'm only joking.
Kate Devlin from the Herald. Mr Corbyn, you just said that many people met people on both sides of the divide in Northern Ireland. I'm just wondering, during those years, if you ever met political representatives of loyalist paramilitary groups.
John, do you want to pick up on the social care one first of all? Apologies to us, I wasn't able to get in.
I mean, social care, as we all know, has quite rightly become one of the big issues of this election, following, as we all know, the chaos of the Tory manifesto with the dementia tax, and it's something which is being raised with us all the time on the doorstep, particularly in marginal constituencies across the country. We know that social care has been in crisis for some time. 4.6 billion has been cut from social care over the last 6 or 7 years. You'll recall, of course, Surrey County Council pleading for special arrangements with the government because of the social care crisis hitting their areas. We've said we'll put more money into social care. It needs an emergency injection of money, and we will provide that money. We'll do 8 billion across the Parliament. On the specifics of a cap, you will also recall Jeremy Hunt on the Today programme, on the morning of the Conservative manifesto launch, ruling out a cap in quite clear and stark terms. He's been made to look rather silly now, consequently, following the Prime Minister's panicked, chaotic manoeuvre. But we believe that the principles of Dilnot are sound principles. We will want to consult on the principles of Dilnot, and we will want to move over a Parliament to a national care service. But we believe we have to proceed with consensus, and we are very happy and indeed keen to talk to other political parties across the Parliament, the opposition parties, the Conservatives and the Liberals, when of course we're in government in that Parliament, perhaps, about what that final social care settlement looks like. But what you've not got with us is the shilly-shallying around on social care that you've seen with the Conservative government. We're going to put substantial investment into social care because the people who have been denied the social care support that they expect and deserve over these last 6 to 7 years deserve better.
Thanks, John. I'm just going to ask Jeremy to respond to the other questions, and Angie, if you'll sort of wind up on the education bit.
John has made the points on social care that we will put money in immediately. The current crisis is appalling, and the fact that the Conservatives have done a U-turn on a manifesto is, I think, a record breaker in British political history. We will fund social care properly. We will have a national social care system. And please understand the stress that families and individuals go through. Individuals, often elderly and alone, stuck in hospital beds because they can't get the social care they need. Families stressed out because often an older relative cannot get the support they need, and somebody, usually women, having to give up work in order to care for them. And those with multiple needs disabled children, or those with learning difficulties, not getting the support that they need. Social care, I think, is fundamental to how you live in a decent and civilised society, and we are determined to achieve a good quality social care system that takes the stress away from people. On the attitude the Prime Minister takes towards negotiations, I certainly wouldn't use language like that myself. I think it's totally inappropriate to describe anyone as naked, even me. We will approach the negotiations, as I've set out, in a very serious way, primarily to gain and continue this tariff-free access to the European market. But we're not approaching the negotiations by threatening Europe, by threatening that if you don't give us everything we want on day one, we're going to walk away, slash corporation tax, give lots of giveaways to very big corporations in order to set up some kind of rival tax haven on the shores of Europe. We're leaving the European Union. We're still going to have a relationship with Europe in the future, and that will be the basis of our negotiations. And so we will approach them, obviously, immediately after the election on those principal bases. We have been reaching out already. Keir Starmer has visited most of the capitals across Europe, met the Commission, met the Parliament, and 27 parliaments are going to have to ultimately vote on this, as well as the European Parliament and of course the Commission. We'll be standing up for the needs of the economy and people of this country, but we will be having sensible and serious negotiations, and that's our determination to achieve that tariff-free access to the European market. On the point that Kate raised, yes, I met many people in Northern Ireland over many years, in both sides. I've had long conversations, for example, with David Irvine and others who had come out of the different traditions in Northern Ireland. But let's be positive. A peace process was achieved by the leaders of all of the major parties stepping out of their comfort zone in order to meet each other and agree a long-term peace strategy. Absolutely remarkable achievement, and it's been used as a template for peace processes in other parts of the world, and I think it's something that a lot of people should be very, very proud of, that was achieved, because the alternative is to go back to the horrors of the Troubles, the horrors of the suspension of so much of the normal liberties of people of Northern Ireland because of the Troubles at that time. Let's be positive at the achievements that were made during that period. This conference this morning is about our future. It is about health. It is about education. And I'm very proud that in this election, our party is putting forward something positive, confident, hopeful and optimistic for the people of this Britain, of this country. We're not threatening with another 5 years of cuts, closures and loss of jobs and low wages. That's the difference between us and the Conservatives.
Thanks, Jeremy. And a final word, Angie?
Yeah, since being elected to Parliament 2 years ago, I've talked a lot about my upbringing and the fact that I grew up on a council estate and my mum couldn't read or write, and the deprivation that I saw when I was growing up. And I don't do it because I'm extraordinary. I do it to show how ordinary I am. And I do it to tell the British public about what the National Education Service that Labour are producing will mean to them. The Sure Start centres that Labour instigated in the last government that allowed me to be a better parent, enabled me to be a good mum at 16. I'm proud of Labour's legacy, and I'm hurt, and our communities are hurt by the devastation of the cuts and the losses to that programme. And the childcare, working for barely any money as a woman to keep a foot on the ladder, the career ladder, because we know if we leave our careers to go off, we won't be able to continue, and that inequality grows in our country. Many working families across the UK cannot afford the childcare in this country. Our National Education Service and our announcement yesterday on the 30 hours of free childcare for all 2 to 4 year olds and the investment back into our Sure Start centres shows you that under Labour, children like me, all children, adults across the UK will get those opportunities. And I think that's what Britain is asking for, demanding. And the Tories will tell you you can't have it. Well, Britain, you can. It's your judgment on June the 8th. Vote for Labour and vote for change.
Andy, thanks very much. The passion and pragmatism in one neat bundle. Thanks very much, everybody. I'm sorry I couldn't get everybody in.